Hello, and welcome everyone to the CyVerse Learning Institute's Focus Forum webinar series. I'm Tina Lee, CyVerse's User Engagement Officer, and today we are hosting a presentation on Git for Mere Mortals by Meghan Balk. Meghan's a postdoc at the University of Arizona who works closely with Team CyVerse on our Learning Institute trainings. She also does her own research as well. For those unfamiliar with CyVerse, we are an NSF-funded cyber infrastructure project, and this free webinar series is designed to fulfill part of our mission to train scientists on how to use CyVerse's computational resources. Let's take care of some housekeeping really quickly, and then we'll start the webinar. Today's presentation is roughly 30 minutes with time for Q&A at the end. Please open the Zoom chat window and type your questions there for Meghan. Materials from today's webinar, such as her slides and the video recording, will be posted on a wiki page, and we'll send that link out to all the registrants later today or maybe first thing Monday. The CyVerse Learning Institute is busy planning our second foundational open science skills course and our third container camp. Both are scheduled for spring 2020. Please visit our website for more information on these trainings and to register. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Meghan. Welcome, Meghan. Please feel free to tell us a bit about yourself.
All right. Hi, everyone. As Tina said, my name is Meghan. I'm a postdoc here that works on both fossils and vertebrate traits more generally. And I use GitHub for most of my projects, where either I just want to have a place online for my projects to be stored with a history of what I've done, or to work with other organizations, which I'll go over today in the webinar. So first I want to start out with what Git is versus GitHub. So Git is a versioning software, and then there's different platforms that you can use that on, such as Bitbucket, GitLab, GitHub, and we're mostly going to be talking, actually primarily going to be talking about GitHub today. And I assume that people have maybe heard about GitHub, but maybe don't really know how to use it, or don't know all the different ways it can be used, or to make it really interactive with collaborations, for example. So we're going to go over how to create a profile, how to create a repository, what a repository is, how to create issues, how to work on your repositories locally versus online, how to create pull requests, which I'll go over what those mean as well, branches and forks, which I'll also go over, all these terms that might maybe you've heard of but don't really know what they mean, how you look at your version history and changes to repository, and then some kind of extra stuff, I hope, if we have time. So first I want to go over the basic workflow of GitHub and maybe some basic terms that you might need to know. So when I say local, I mean that's on your computer, not online, versus on the online repository. So when you have a local repository, you can put that up on GitHub. So a repository is kind of like a folder system, where you have a folder and a bunch of files in it, or maybe you have a folder with folders and files. And the way that GitHub works is that you select what files you want to be stored online, then they become tracked, and then you commit them. So it's almost like creating in Word like a save, and then those are staged, and then you push them. So then you take the commit that you're like, okay, I've saved everything locally, now I'm going to upload it online. And then to get everything from online, the keywords to know are fetch and pull. So you fetch it all down, and you say like, okay, I'm now downloading everything from online, and then I'm going to pull it in to my local repository. That way they can sync up. So those are the basic workflows. So in the chat, there should be, let me just double check. Yep, Tina put it in there. There should be links to GitHub and a tutorial if you want to follow along. Otherwise, as you guys know, this will be recorded, and so you can follow along later as well. So let me get to GitHub. So on GitHub, if you've already created a profile, that's great. We'll go over what you see. So this is what a profile page looks like. The main things to keep in mind or to notice is that you have this fun little thing of how many contributions you have, so how much you're working on your repository. You have things like organizations. An example of an organization is CyVerse. So I already pulled up CyVerse. And within CyVerse, there's like CyVerse Learning Materials, which has all of its own repositories. So you can think of an organization as like a super folder with a bunch of subfolders in it that kind of organize each project. And within organizations, you can have different people involved. You can subset those people onto specific teams if you want. And then back to the repository. So I'm now going to go back to my profile. Up here you have fun things like followers and following, how many people you're following and who's following you. The nice thing about that is that you can often ask these people for help if you need it. Under repositories, these are going to be all of like your big folders with different files and folders in them, kind of a subcategory of an organization. The other thing that you can do, well, let's create a repository first. So first we're going to create a repository online. So as advertised, I'm going to talk about working with your repository both online and locally on the desktop. So we're going to start by creating a repository online. So we're going to hit this new button, green button. Anytime you want to create something in GitHub, they make it green, which is very convenient. So we're going to create a new repository. I'm going to call this one test. I'm going to create a description, which I just like to do that way I remember what I'm doing. The nice thing about GitHub is that you can document every step you take, which is really useful when 6 months from now you don't remember what past person yourself did. You're always your number one collaborator, so you want to make sure that you remember what you've done. So this will be demo repo is what the lingo is for a shortened version of repository. Demo repo for this webinar. It's always useful to initialize it with a README. You can create your own READMEs, but this just does it automatically. And the nice thing about READMEs, again, is that you can edit them as you develop your repository, and the READMEs usually tell you a bit of metadata, tell you what the repository is about. So again, it's good just to keep track of what you're doing. Maybe you put in there under the README where you've left off. So we're going to create a repository. And then here it is. So there's no files. The things to look at are things that we'll go over: issues, pull requests, and then settings. I'll go over settings soon. There's one commit. That first commit that we did is that we initialized the repository. And so as you create changes, it'll show you the number of commits, and you look back at the number of commits to look at the versioning or the changes that you've made. There's one branch. We'll go over what branches are a little bit later. And we'll also go over what releases are, which are really handy for production of maybe a data set or a code that you're creating. And then currently there's one contributor. So we're going to look at settings right here, which is the little gear first. Under settings, the two main things, or three main things rather, to look at. One is this watching. So this is if maybe you're part of, if it's your own repository, perhaps you want to watch it, but if you are involved in another repository where someone brought you along, maybe you only want to pay attention to the releases, maybe you don't want to watch it at all and just hop in when you want to, or just never be notified. And so watching helps you keep track of changes to repositories. I've used them for especially releases when I've been interested in API developments for fish-based or paleobiology database, so different databases where they're creating an interactive framework. I'll keep an eye out for the new releases to see the changes. The other thing in settings under options, which is where we are, so you can manage your notifications, but it's this danger zone. This is how you archive or delete or transfer ownership. So these are really big changes to your repository. So if you want to clean up your repository, or you want to get, or maybe something shouldn't have been made public yet, you can make it private. So these are all the, what's called the danger zone for GitHub. The other thing you can do, which hopefully a lot of us are interested in, oops, I knew that would happen, is add collaborators. So this is how you can bring people onto your team, assign them roles, which we'll get to within a repository. So for example, if I wanted to add my advisor, Ramona, that's how I would do it. I'd just find her on GitHub. So you need to have a GitHub account to be a collaborator, and then I can add her as a collaborator. So now we're going to go back to the repository. And if we want to work on this locally, one of the things we need to do is create a local folder. So I've created a folder under my username called GitHub, and this is where all my GitHub repositories lie. So these are my different organizations I'm a part of, and then I have my personal group that I have, and then within here are other personal repositories. And so the way that we work on this locally is we go here to where it says clone or download. Oh, actually, I'm going to take a step back. I want to go to issues first before we go to clone or download, because issues is something that you can only do online. So it won't make sense to go to the desktop. So under issues, issues are a great way to keep track of decisions that you've made, to point out bugs in your code, to point out if you're doing it for a Word document, things that need to be added. It's a really great way to have another set of metadata. So we're going to create a new issue. Maybe I want to say we need to add some documentation. And so now we're going to submit this new issue. And what you'll notice is that these issues have these hashtags associated with them. So you can link issues that are related. So now if I want to create another new issue, I can say make rule number 1. And then we can say we link it back to add documentation. You can also assign it to people. So I can assign it to myself, for example. And also make labels. And you can create your own labels too. So edit labels, you can create your own. And what's nice is that then these will group issues that maybe have different hashtags, but that are related. So this will be documentation. And then I'm going to submit the new issue. What's also nice about this is that you can do things like vote. Say if you like it, don't understand it, what is happening. You can do all those types of things. So I've used it if I'm making a new mission statement or vision statement for some organization. I have people vote with thumbs up or thumbs down on if they like the changes. All right, and then if you have decided that you've already created this documentation, it's done, you can then close the issue. We haven't done that yet, so I won't close it. All right, so now we're going to go back to the repository and go back to what I was talking about for using it locally. So to use it locally, we've created that folder, if you remember, called GitHub, and then mine links to my personal repository or group. And I'm going to say open in desktop. And now you get this pop-up that says, oops, should probably redo that. Open desktop, okay. So now you get this that says, all right, where do you want to put it? I want to put it under my username in my GitHub folder, under my personal group, and then add that repository. So I'm going to say clone. And then when I go back to my folder, there it is. There's the test. And in GitHub Desktop, it's a nice way to, without using a terminal or console or some other, or uploading it from the online interface. It's a nice way to sync up what's online and what's local on your computer. So here you can see what your current repository is and where you're at. So I can switch what repository I want to be in. I can switch, we'll go over branches soon, but you can look at branches, you can look at pull requests, so the same things that you can look at online. And then best practice is to always fetch the origin, and then if there's changes, you want to then pull them into your local repository. Okay, so now we're going to add some files, specifically the documentation, since we need to do that since there's an issue for it. So we're going to start with doing that online first, and then we'll do it locally on our desktop. So we can say create new file right here. We can also always upload files from our desktop, but hopefully that's pretty intuitive. And so we're going to create a new file. We have to name it. It's going to be called instructions. And I'm going to say rule 1, get a computer. And then we're going to say create a commit message, created rule number 1. Commits messages are really useful to let, if you're working with multiple people or even, again, yourself in 6 months, to remind yourself of what you did, why you did it. Most people don't look at commit issues, so I'll have silly ones that'll say fixed a comma or misspelled a word. Silly stuff like that. And then I'm going to commit directly to the main branch or master branch. I'm going to say commit new file, and I'll talk about branches soon, so don't worry. So there it is. There's instructions. And now if we want to work on this locally, let's say, so there's different benefits for working on things online versus locally. Locally, I tend to work on almost exclusively, mostly because if I don't have internet, that's fine. It allows me to pull things from my own computer without constantly having to upload, and then I can just bulk push everything to GitHub. But some people might prefer the interface here. So in here, I'm going to say, okay, let's fetch the origin in desktop. Now you'll see that it says pull origin. So it means, okay, we have fetched it. We see that there's a change. So now I'm going to pull it. So then if we look back at our folder, here are the instructions. And so we're going to open this with whatever text editor you like. I prefer Sublime, so we're going to work on it in Sublime. I'm going to add rule number 2, which will say write some code. I'm going to save that. I'll exit out. And now on your desktop, it'll let you know, hey, you made some changes, and I'll even show you what the change is that you made. And I'll say added rule number 2. So again, have to create a commit message. I'll commit that to the master. And then now I've basically saved it, and now I'm going to say, okay, put that online. There's some feedback, I think, going on. And so now when we go back online and we look at instructions, and what's useful about this is that if multiple people are working on it, then you can see changes in real time. All right. So now I'm going to show you how you can look at the changes that you've made. So online, if we click instructions, we can look at the history. So you can see the changes and the commit messages. You can also go back to older versions, and each version has its own unique ID, so that way you know how to go back. And likewise, on the desktop, you can look at history. And this includes all the changes you've made either online or locally, as long as they've been synced up. All right. So now we're going to talk about branches, which I've mentioned a couple times. So branches, we're going to go back to that repository. So branches are useful if perhaps you want to fix a bug and then bring it back, or if you want to work on something kind of independently and it's still in rough draft form, and you don't want to show it to all of your collaborators or your whole group. It's nice you can work on that specific branch privately and then put it back to the main repository. So forks stay within the or branches stay within the repository. There's another term that we'll get to called forks. Forks is when you take something from another repository and bring it into your local repository or your local group. So branches, you stay on that main group within the organization or within that repository itself. So to create a branch, there's a couple ways online. Online, we can create a new branch right here. So we can say branch 1. Maybe you want a better, more descriptive naming. For this purpose, I'm just going to name it branch 1. So now you can see I'm on branch 1. And then I'm going to create some changes. So I can edit here. And maybe I'll say, write some code, use best practices. So another way that you can create a branch, but we're not going to do that now since we're already on a branch, is when you, let me write my commit message, added rule number 3, is that when you commit it, you can commit to a new branch as well. So that's another way that you can create another branch. So you're going to commit changes. And so you're going to see here, and they're on branch 1. So if we go back to master, for example, you'll see that our rule number 3 is not on the main branch yet. It's still on the side branch. All right, and then on the desktop, you can do the same thing. So let's again fetch from the origin always being online, and pull, no changes because it's on a branch. We can say, we can go here to where it says current branch. We can either create a new branch if we want, or we can go to that branch we've already created. And we're going to fetch again. And so you'll see this thing called create a pull request. We're going to go over that in a second. But it's basically the same thing online, where if I'm in branch 1, I can go into the instructions, open it again with Sublime. So I can see that third. I'm going to say make another rule, be sure to add comments. And then here I'm going to say added rule number 4, commit to branch, push to origin. And then you'll see that if I go to branch 1 and go to instructions, there's rule 4. So when you make a change on a branch and you want to put it back to the master branch, there's this thing called compare and pull requests. So pull requests are where you've made a change and either you don't have permissions to make changes on that repository or that file, or you've made changes on a branch and want to bring them back onto the main trunk, basically is how I think about it, where you have your master branch, which is really the trunk, and then you have all these side things that maybe come back in. It's kind of reticulate. So we're going to online, compare and pull request, and I'll let you know if it's able to merge. If it's not, you'll get an error, and then you can compare the changes that there is. And I can leave a comment if I wanted to. Please add rules 3 and 4. So I can create the pull request. The nice thing about pull requests, especially if you've been working on a branch, is that once it's on the master branch, then everyone who's on the repository, so all of your collaborators can take a look at it, and it's a nice way to get another set of eyes on any of the changes you've made before you commit them and make them really a part of the master branch or the master project. So again, GitHub will let you know that, hey, you can merge and pull this request. It's good to go. So I can do that. And then you have to confirm it. And then you can always delete the branch when you're done. Online, you'll see create pull requests, or on the desktop rather, you see create pull requests. You can't do those quite from online. So when you do that, it'll take you online. but we've already taken care of the pull request. So now there's nothing to compare, but it'll take you online to do that. Okay, so we're going to go back here. All right, and now we went over merging. Can't do merging on the desktop either. Again, it'll take you online to do that. Ooh, there's something in the chat. Okay, so someone asked if you're the only person using a repository, would you naturally use branches? That's a great question. Generally, probably not. You'd just be creating changes, but if you want to perhaps take some code that you're working on and test it or modify it for something else, perhaps then you would want to create kind of a sideline and do something with the code before making all the changes to the main code that you're working on, for example. So it's kind of, so that would be one way that perhaps you would use branches. So akin to branches are forks. So we go to this repository. So forks are when you want to copy a repository and bring it into your own. So for example, I've used this where one of my colleagues created this really great web interface to measure pictures of fossils, and I wanted to co-opt it to have students identify bite marks on fossil bones. And so I didn't want to make any changes to her repository or what she's done. I wanted to take her base code and bring it into my own repository. So we can do something similar. So I'm on CyVerse Learning Materials. I'll take the CyVerse tutorial template, and I'm going to say, I want to now modify this template that's already been made for my own purposes. So the way that I'll do that is by forking it. I'm going to fork it to my repository. And it says, all right, it's doing it. You can see there's like a little copier right here. So it's copying it over. And now it's in my repository. And I'll even tell you where the original repository came from. And so what we can do is we can, again, do the same thing we've done before. We have a new repository, and now we're going to create it locally on our computer by cloning it or downloading it and opening it up in GitHub desktop. Oops, clone again. I was practicing, that's why it gave me that error. And so here it is, and it's saved. We can look in the Finder, and we'll see that CyVerse tutorial template. Here's my GitHub folder, my local group, and then this tutorial. And so now if I want to make changes, I can. So let's say I want to change the index, Sublime. I can make changes here to it and modify it for my own use. And then again, do everything that we've already talked about where we make changes, we'll write a commit message, we'll push it to the origin, and then we can always fetch it from the origin. So, and pull from the origin. So again, I just want to remind everyone that the basic workflow is that you have your files, you track them. That's like creating kind of a saving. You commit them where you say what you saved. Now they're staged to be put online, and then you push it up online. And if you want to take any changes that you've made online, you'll fetch them. And that's just kind of the computer checking if everything on your local repository matches what's online. And if it's different, then you pull the new files down to your local repository. All right, so some other things to go over. I'm going to go back to the test repository. So if you ever need to get back to it, actually, I'll do it from here so that way you guys can see. Let's say I'm in this repository, but I want to go switch to a different one. You just click back onto your main repository, your main group, and then we can click onto the test repository. So let's say that these instructions, I want the instructions to have maybe releases. Oops, there's another question. Oh, the recording for the webinar will be posted later. I'll have Tina answer that. So let's say you want to have your instructions released, and then you'll do like a big update and release another one. So the way that you do that is under releases. We can create a new release. I'll go back over that a little bit more slowly, I just realized. So again, it's this little tag release. We're going to click that. And then we're going to create a new release. So tag version is where I put my version number. That's my version number. And then usually for the title, you can name it whatever you want. I tend to put the date. That way I remember when I last updated it or worked on it. Also gives me an idea, depending on how you version, if I've made significant changes or not since the last date. So October 11th, or rather 11/10/2019, first edition of the instructions. And we're going to publish the release. And so I've used this, for example, I'm working on a project where I have a template for researchers to fill out. And as I update the template, I'll create a new release. So that's what they're used for. Or if you have a data that you're releasing. Although I will caution that GitHub is really useful for documentation. It's really useful for coding. It's really useful for building websites. It's not the best for storing or modifying data. Every time you sort your data differently, it thinks that GitHub thinks that a major change has happened and will say that you've changed your data even though you maybe just sorted A to Z on some column. So I would caution against data on GitHub and have that served somewhere else. For example, the discovery environment in CyVerse, where you can just pull it directly. How do I view your version history? So so I can go back over that. So version history. If I go to a specific file, I can look at history here, see all the changes that I've made. Likewise, on the desktop, I'm going to switch back to my test repository. So again, you can get to different repositories using this down arrow. I can look at the history and look at all the changes that I've made. All right. Is there another chat? Okay. The other thing you can do, if I want to, for example, keep an eye on different repositories. Actually, let me go back to the test. I can go to settings. If I'm working with lots of people, under notifications, I can say that for my personal repository, I can ask for notifications when different things happen, when people work on it. I can also, if I go to, for example, CyVerse Learning Materials, so I'm going to go to this organization. I'm going to go to this repository, and I can watch it. So right now I'm not watching it. Maybe I want to be watching it in case there's conversations. So in case people are creating issues or pull requests or have modified the code in any way, I can say, I can get notifications for that. All right. And the last thing I want to go over are fun things like badges. So badges are really useful for, again, if you're working in a large group or large team, for letting people know where you're at with it. So if we go here and we go to, so this is where the tutorial is, by the way. It was in the chat. So I created some code block for badges. Oops. Guess that went away. Luckily, I have it somewhere else, so I will update this for everyone. But I am quickly going to navigate to where I have it. So you guys are going to see how I poorly organize my computer. But there's some code block here. So you can go find a badge. So badges are things like you can say maintenance is needed, or ask, like, I'm using this repository, so ask me anything. You can say that it's in Python. You can say that it's in Markdown. You can say if it's open science or not. You can say that it's geospatial science. So there's lots of different things that you can do with the badges. Some people like to use it for versions or to keep updating collaborators or other people. So I already found a badge, and so you will put your badge in the README file. So I had some code. I'm going to put it in there. Some funky syntax, so you can use what I have for on the tutorial, which I'll update to copy the basically plug and chug, where you would put in the name of the badge and then put in the link to the badge. I'm going to say added badge, commit my changes, and now you'll see in the README that this is open source. So last thing I want to go over before ending this is some helpful hints that I hopefully you guys got, but if not, I'll just go over them. So when you're working locally on your computer, always fetch and pull. So that way you have the most up-to-date files in your repository. It's best practice to list any decisions or to-dos or assign people to-dos and issues. By submitting pull requests, which we went over, it allows the group to approve changes or to look at changes. Always write a commit message, that even if it's silly, like added a comma, that way you just know, oh, did I make a little change or a minor change? Or what changes did I even make? Working locally allows you to work without internet, or works with your own, or privately before you commit them to GitHub. Another good practice with GitHub, even though it's very scary and it's not here, but I'll add it, is to commit often. So keep writing a commit message and pushing it to the repository. Just keep updating it. Working on a branch, when you branch it, allows you to fix bugs or write a rough draft without affecting what other people are doing on the master branch. And then creating a fork is a great way to co-opt code or material for your own purposes. And that will all be on the tutorial page. So with that, if anyone has any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them.
Thanks, Megan. You've answered some questions as we went along, which is great. I'll give people a few more seconds to think about any questions they have. But one of them that I had was, if you commit a change and the group, I guess, accepts that change, but then say they want to undo it, how do you, that might be too advanced, but is that something you can demonstrate real quickly?
I will try.
Okay.
Every so often it works for me, every so often I forget. So Google is your friend, obviously.
Yeah.
So if you go to, I'll go back to the repository, I'll go to instructions. And now I want to look at the oops, I don't want that. Sorry. Go to instructions, and I'll go to history.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that I don't like rule 3 and 4. I want to go back to rule 2. And that is what I do. Nope, that is not what I do. I think you click this one, although it's hard for me to, this is what I mean by sometimes it works, it doesn't. But if you go through your history, you should be able to revert back to an older version.
Okay, yeah, I'm sitting here with Ramona, and I think we'll include this on a future webinar, since this was mere mortals. Maybe we've been talking about doing one for demigods or demigoddesses. Yeah. So, okay, there's another question. Is there a way to get a visual of your overall version history, like a map of sorts, where you can click on individual commits to see what happened at various points?
Yes. So here, So you have to do them individually sometimes. So here, like I can see changes that I made for each commit. So it'll tell me the changes that I've made for a single commit. And then on your desktop, oops, we're already there. I'm going to go back to the master branch. So you can see all of your history and just click through and see the changes that were made. So maybe not all in one go, especially since that might be really overwhelming if you have a project that's been happening for a year or more, or with lots of people where you're making lots of different commits. So you'll kind of have to go through them, but that's how you would do that.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we'll wrap up. I did want to add, since somebody or you had mentioned that you've discovered that Git is not great for managing your data, we have previous webinars on managing your data using CyVerse, and one will be coming up later this season. I think I can't remember the date, but check on our website for that. Is there any other questions at this point? If not, please join us in 2 weeks. We are going to do a webinar on 10 simple rules for writing and sharing computational analyses using Jupyter Notebooks and CyVerse. That's going to be given by Peter Rose of the San Diego Supercomputing Center, and that's October 25th. Peter just did a PLOS article on that with his team, so we thought we'd share the wealth of knowledge he will give on that. Anyway, if there's no other questions, thank you everyone, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.